We're learning more about Pete Hegseth's Pentagon purge from two highly experienced former military officers who said they were pushed out of their jobs for questioning his directives. To quote one of them, Hegseth is intimidated by people who have real warfighting background and don't just talk about the warfighting ethos. I think he just can't stand people who will call him on his BS. In just a year and a half, Hegseth has already pushed out dozens of senior officials and reportedly blocked the promotions of dozens more, including women and people of color. MS Now Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar spoke with those military officials. Rick is still with us. Priya, these officers not only talk to you about the impact on the senior ranks, but the mixed feelings it's creating among active duty troops. What did they tell you?
Yeah, that's right, Alicia. Well, many of them are telling me that they're facing kind of their own moral conundrum. Do they decide to also get out and kind of protest with their feet and retire early? Or is it better for them to stay in their roles just as simply sort of a placeholder so that a quote unquote loyalist doesn't come in behind them and take their spot? You know, up until this point, the only...
Good to see you all. Dr. John podcast rolling again. After 3 years of litigation, including appeals to the Supreme Court, Trump's legal effort to overturn a ruling has failed. The answer is still no. The sheer resources and time invested crashed against a legal system that refused to bend, even for a sitting president. A federal judge just ordered the release of $5.8 million. That money is going straight to E. Jean Carroll, the woman who has been locked in this legal battle with Trump for years. And no, this is not some brand new lawsuit you haven't heard of, some fresh legal drama that just materialized out of nowhere. This is the sexual abuse and defamation case from 2023, the one that has been grinding through the court system for years.
Two of these 25 senior military officers who have spoken out about their experiences is one, Admiral Nancy LaCour, who's now running for Congress as a Democrat in South Carolina, and also the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Charles Q. Brown, who recently wrote an op-ed in Foreign Affairs. And I asked these senior military officers, why aren't you guys speaking out publicly about what happened to you? And many of them, raised concerns about their pensions being affected, but also they said that they weren't sure that, speaking out publicly about this or even, encouraging some of their fellow colleagues to quit en masse would really move the needle with this administration. One of them told me, quote, for many of us, part of it is a sense of loyalty to the organization that is bigger than these clowns. We know that in the organization, there are still some good people trying to do good things, and we don't want to say things that might hurt them. So really, Alicia, they believe that fundamentally there are still good people in the military. And so even though they feel discouraged about what's happening, they still have hope for the future.
The one where a jury looked at all the evidence, heard all the testimony, weighed all the arguments, and decided that Trump had to pay. For 3 years, that money just sat in an escrow account, frozen like a time capsule, while Trump's legal team tried every trick in the book to keep it locked away. They filed motions, they appealed rulings. They did everything humanly possible to prevent that money from moving. And for 3 years, they succeeded. The money stayed put, accruing interest, growing larger while everyone waited for the legal process to play out. Here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. The Supreme Court had a chance to step in and save Trump from this. They looked at his appeal, reviewed the arguments, considered the case, and they said, no thanks. They declined to even hear it.
Rick, there was this statement that Priya got from the Pentagon. It reads, not a single general officer or flag officer has been fired, raising concerns about any issue. That charge is completely false. If they believe what they're saying to be true, then they should put their names on their statements on the record. Isn't the fear of reprisal the point here? We've seen Hegseth go after, Senator Mark Kelly, trying to demote his rank, cut his pension. This isn't just theoretical.
But Alicia, that's what dissent is about sacrificing yourself for the greater good. I think if these officers put their names on the statements, it would be even more powerful. But the larger problem is that Secretary Hegseth cannot tolerate dissent. Strong leaders can tolerate and welcome dissent. Weak leaders can't. The fact that he's pushing out people that disagree with him is disturbing, and it also violates what makes the American military special. We have had civilian leadership of the military since our founding. And we've had officers who protested about things that were happening in the military. And that's one reason our military was able to adjust.
No explanation, no long opinion dissecting the legal issues, no dramatic dissent from a justice who disagreed with the majority, just a flat rejection, a simple refusal to engage, and that was that. Can you believe this? The highest court in the entire country looked at this case and basically said, we're not touching it. The lower ruling stands. The decision is final. There is nowhere else to go. So once that door slammed shut, once the Supreme Court made it crystal clear that they were not going to intervene, a federal judge named Lewis Kaplan didn't waste any time. He ordered the funds released from escrow right then, right there. And get this, Trump's own lawyers appealed that release order in less than an hour. 1 hour.
The fact that he is reacting like an authoritarian leader in an authoritarian regime where officers can't say no is something that's disturbing and goes against the history of our military and what makes our military special.
Given that atmosphere where dissent and public dissent especially is so difficult, how would you characterize the overall morale inside the Pentagon?
Well, I would say there's definitely a sense of paranoia. As you guys just outlined, many of these senior military officers really do believe that it's part of their job to advise the Secretary of Defense on a number of issues that are currently being debated by lawmakers on the Hill and in the American public. The legality of those Southcom boat strikes that were allegedly carrying narco terrorists and drug trafficking, the use of the National Guard in American cities over the last year and a half, and the end state, the goals in Iran, and whether or not the strategy is working. So I think a lot of people are feeling as though they're not empowered to speak up. And I think it's also important to note
they didn't even let the ink dry before they were back in court trying to stop the clock again. That is how badly this team did not want that money moving. They fought until the literal final second, until the money was actually in motion. And even then, they tried to stop it. Now, here's a fact that a lot of people are getting wrong. The original jury award back in 2023 was $5 million. Just $5 million. That was the number the jury landed on after considering all the evidence. So where does the 5.8 million number come from? Interest. 3 years of interest stacking up while the appeals dragged on added almost $800,000 on top. That is roughly an 11% jump just from delay.
That the Pentagon has said that they are doing this on purpose, that they're trying to streamline leadership and reduce the number of flag and general officers. But if that's the case, why are the targets of so many of these firings women and people of color? And this isn't happening in isolation. This is happening while Secretary of Defense Hegseth has repeatedly said that he believes that a lot of those promotions were part of some sort of woke agenda and DEI culture where these people were promoted not based on merit, but to meet some sort of quotas. And I think the women specifically and the people of color who are remaining in the active duty military right now are concerned about their own futures, especially given the fact that over the last 10 years, we've seen so much progress with the lift of the ban on women in combat roles. And now, as the New York Times reported, for the first time in a decade, this year, there will be no woman being promoted to the rank of admiral in the active duty Navy, Alicia.
So in a weird way, every single appeal Trump's team filed to slow this down ended up making the final bill bigger, not smaller. Yeah, think about that for a second. The strategy of delay, of fighting every step of the way, ended up costing them more money in the long run. The very tactic designed to minimize the damage actually increased it. And this is not even the end of the story, not by a long shot. There is a second, much bigger number hanging over Trump in this same fight, $83.3 million. That is from a separate defamation case. A different jury, a different year, but the same two people going head to head. That case is still under appeal right now. So while Carol just banked her $5.8 million, there is a mountain of money still sitting out there, still being fought over, and it is not going away anytime soon. And look, this is not some random internet drama that popped up out of nowhere, some fleeting controversy that will be forgotten by next week. This case has been grinding through the court system for years, quietly in the background, while everything else in politics grabbed the headlines. It went through a trial. It went through a first round of appeals. It went through a second round. It even went through a request for the Supreme Court to step in and rescue it. That is about as far as a case can possibly go inside the legal system. There is no higher court left to appeal to after this. None. So when people say he'll just appeal again, that's actually not accurate anymore. This is the ceiling. This is as high as it gets. So here's the real question we are going to dig into today. Why did Trump's team fight so hard over a payment that compared to his overall wealth is honestly not that huge? Why appeal something 1 hour after losing? And what does this whole saga tell us about how legal battles follow a president around no matter how many times his lawyers try to bury them in paperwork? Stick with me because we are breaking down exactly what happened in that courtroom and why so many people online are misunderstanding this story completely. Let's slow down for a second and actually explain what this case is even about. Because a lot of people online are mixing up two totally different lawsuits, and that is where the confusion starts. There are two separate legal fights between Trump and E. Jean Carroll, and mixing them up makes the whole story way more confusing than it needs to be. So let's untangle this one step at a time. The first case goes all the way back to claims Carroll made about something that happened in the mid-1990 seconds. She said Trump sexually assaulted her inside a dressing room at a department store in Manhattan. When she went public with that story years later in a memoir, Trump responded the way he usually responds to accusations like this. He denied it flat out, and he said some pretty harsh things about her credibility in the process. Now, here's the twist that trips a lot of people up. The lawsuit that led to this $5.8 million payment was not really about the assault claim by itself. It was about what he said afterward. In 2023, a jury found him liable for sexual abuse. And they also found that his public denials counted as defamation. 2 findings, 1 case, 1 jury. That jury landed on $5 million in damages back in 2023. Trump's legal team did what legal teams do. They appealed and appealed again. For 3 years, that $5 million sat frozen in an escrow account, basically untouchable, just growing interest like a very expensive savings account nobody wanted to open. Meanwhile, out in the real world, the case kept climbing through the court system, one procedural step after another while Carroll waited. Back when all of this first started, Trump's public response was pretty predictable. He denied the whole thing, and he did it loudly. He said he never even heard of Carroll before this all came out. He suggested she made the story up to sell copies of her memoir. His lawyers painted her as someone chasing attention, someone looking for fame off the back of his name. That's the exact kind of public denial that ended up being the whole reason for the defamation half of this case. The jury didn't just look at what allegedly happened in that dressing room decades ago. They looked at what he said about her out loud in public years later and decided those statements crossed the legal line. And here's something worth remembering, because it puts the timeline in perspective. All of this legal back and forth has been happening while Trump has been serving as president. Not before he took office, not after some quiet retirement from politics, during it. Court dates, filings, appeals, all moving forward on a separate track from everything happening in the West Wing. That is honestly a pretty unusual situation for the country to be sitting with. And it says a lot about how the legal system does not really pause just because someone holds a powerful job. So then just last month, the Supreme Court got their shot to weigh in. And here's where a lot of people misunderstand what happened. The Supreme Court did not rule that Trump was innocent, and they did not rule he was guilty either. They simply declined to hear the appeal at all. Zero explanation given. When the highest court in the country refuses to even look at a case, that basically means the lower court's decision stands permanently, as final as it gets. So the jury's 2023 finding was locked in for good, whether Trump's team liked it or not. Once that happened, the clock started ticking fast. District Judge Lewis Kaplan, who has actually presided over these Carroll cases from the start, ordered the escrow funds released immediately. No more waiting, no more sitting on the sidelines. And this is honestly one of the wildest parts of the whole story. Trump's lawyers filed an appeal of that release order in under an hour. They argued that Trump would suffer, and this is the actual legal term they used, irreparable harm. If the money went out before every last possible avenue was exhausted, irreparable harm, come on. For a payment that had already been legally decided 3 years earlier, sitting in an account collecting interest the entire time. Judge Kaplan was not exactly moved by that argument, and honestly, it's hard to blame him. The money had been parked in escrow specifically for this moment. Carol had already waited 3 full years for a payment a jury decided she deserved. So the release order stood, and shortly after the funds started moving out of that account and into her hands. Now here's a detail that gets missed a lot in the coverage, and it matters. The original award was $5 million flat, but by the time it actually got paid out, it had grown to roughly $5.8 million thanks to interest that piled up during the appeal process. That works out to about an 11% increase purely from the delay. So every appeal filed, every motion, every legal maneuver to slow the process down actually made the bill grow bigger over time. It's almost like the system built in a built-in penalty for stalling. Whether that was the intention or not, Carol's legal team confirmed the payment went through, and in a public statement, her lawyer said they were pleased to report she had received the damages. Simple statement, no fireworks, no victory lap needed, because at that point, the outcome had already been locked in by the Supreme Court's refusal to intervene. But here's the thing that makes this story way bigger than just one payment. And it's the part that a lot of casual news readers are completely missing. This is not the only case. There is a second lawsuit entirely separate, tied to a different set of statements Trump made in 2022. That case went to trial and ended with the jury ordering him to pay $83.3 million. $18.3 million of that was for damage to her reputation. The rest, $65 million, was punitive damages, meaning the jury wanted to punish the behavior and discourage it from happening again. That case has already gone through one round of appeals, and so far the courts have kept upholding the original number. Trump is still appealing that one too, and it is nowhere near finished. So when you put both cases side by side, you start to see the real shape of this story. One case just wrapped up, with real money already sitting in Carol's bank account. The other case, worth more than 14 times as much, is still grinding through the legal system with no clear end date. This is not a story about one lawsuit. It's a story about one piece of a much bigger legal battle finally reaching a conclusion, while an even bigger piece is still very much alive. It's also worth understanding how these two cases are connected, but still legally separate. The first case, the one we've been talking about, covers the assault claim and one specific round of public denials. The second case, worth $83 million, is about a different set of statements Trump made later in 2022. Same accuser, same general subject, but a completely different jury, looking at a completely different set of comments. That is why you can't just add up every headline you see about Trump and Carol and assume it's all one lawsuit. It's two separate fights running on two separate timelines, and only one of them just reached this finish line. And this is exactly where a lot of casual readers get tripped up online. People see the $83 million number and the $5.8 million number and assume someone made a mistake, like the media can't get their facts straight. But no, both numbers are real. They just belong to two totally different court cases. One just paid out. The other is still fighting through appeals courts. And honestly, based on how slowly the first one moved, this next one could take just as long, maybe longer, before anyone sees a dime move. So here's a fair question to ask. If the first case took 3 full years just to get from a jury verdict to an actual payment landing in someone's bank account, how long is the second case worth over 16 times as much money actually going to take? There is no clean answer to that yet. But if the pattern holds, do not expect it to wrap up quickly. Big money, big lawyers, and a case this high profile usually means years, not months. And that is exactly why this story deserves more attention than it's getting. Because so many headlines are treating this like it's over, like it's some closed chapter. It's not. It's one closed door in a house that still has a lot of rooms left. We are going to break this whole thing down into simple, clear points so you understand exactly why this matters, who actually benefits from all of this, and what happens next in the much bigger fight that's still coming. All right, so let's break this down into simple pieces, because underneath all the legal jargon, this story really comes down to just a few key points. A payment that was legally decided years ago finally happened. This is not new drama. This is old drama finally reaching its ending. Back in 2023, a jury made a decision. Trump owed money for sexual abuse and defamation. That verdict did not change this month. What changed is that every single legal option to delay paying it finally ran out. The Supreme Court's refusal to hear the case was basically the final door closing. So this is less a brand new scandal and more the last chapter of a story that started 3 years ago. Delay tactics backfired, and they backfired in a way that is almost poetic. 3 years of appeals did not shrink the bill, it grew the bill. Interest tacked on nearly $800,000 to the original $5 million verdict. So every motion filed, every appeal argued, every hour spent trying to keep that money locked away actually cost more money in the long run. If you're trying to avoid pain and your strategy accidentally makes the final number bigger, that is not exactly a winning strategy. It's honestly kind of ironic when you think about it. This is only one piece of a much bigger financial mess. $5.8 million sounds like a massive number. And for most people, it absolutely is. But sitting right behind it is another case worth $83.3 million, still working its way through appeals. That second case is not close to finished. So while one debt just got paid, a debt worth over 14 times as much is still hanging out there, completely unresolved. This story is not the end. It's a preview of what's still coming. The 1 hour appeal tells you everything about how hard this fight really was. Filing an appeal within 1 hour of a release order is not normal pacing for typical legal cases. That kind of speed tells you the legal team was determined to fight until the literal last possible second, using every single tool available, even after the Supreme Court had already closed the door. That level of urgency shows just how seriously this fight was being taken behind the scenes right up until the money actually moved. There's actually a fifth point worth adding here, and it's one people tend to skip over. This case shows how public perception and legal reality can move at completely different speeds. For years, plenty of people online treated this whole situation like it was just noise. Just another lawsuit that would fade away or get tied up in appeals forever. But the legal system does not really care about noise. It just keeps moving case by case, ruling by ruling, until it reaches an actual conclusion. So while public attention drifted toward other headlines, this case quietly worked its way all the way to the Supreme Court and then all the way to an actual payment. That gap between what people assume is happening and what is actually happening in the courtroom is honestly one of the most important parts of this entire story. So why does any of this actually matter? Let's talk about that for a second, because it's bigger than just one payment landing in someone's account. It matters because it shows how the legal system deals with a sitting president. A lot of people assume that once someone is in office, court cases from before just sort of freeze or fade away or get quietly buried under the weight of the job. That is clearly not what happened here. The wheels kept turning. The case kept moving through appeals courts and eventually reached the Supreme Court, all while Trump was serving as president. And when the system finally reached its conclusion, the payment order was carried out no matter what title the man holds. It also matters because of what it reveals about legal strategy and how appeals actually function. A lot of people think appealing is basically a free action, something you can do endlessly with zero downside. But this case is a pretty clear example that appeals carry real cost. Interest keeps piling up. Legal fees keep piling up. And at the end of it, if the appeal fails, you're often worse off financially than if you had just settled up front. That is a lesson that applies to a lot more than just this one case. And it matters because there is still a much bigger number looming. $83 million is not a small footnote. It is the headline of a story that has not been written yet. When that case eventually gets resolved, whether that's this year or several years from now, it is going to dwarf this $5.8 million payment completely. So anyone who thinks this chapter closing means the whole story is over is honestly missing the bigger picture entirely. So who actually benefits here? On one side, Carol gets a payment that was legally decided years ago, finally landing in her hands after years of delay. Her legal team confirmed the funds went through and there was no dramatic press conference needed because, frankly, the Supreme Court's silence had already said everything that needed to be said. On the other side, this loss adds to a running list of legal setbacks that keep following Trump around no matter how many appeals get filed or how much time passes. And when you're dealing with a much bigger number still sitting in the pipeline, every single loss along the way starts shaping how that next fight gets viewed. By courts, by the public, and honestly, by anyone paying attention to the pattern forming here. What happens next? The $83.3 million case keeps grinding forward. Appeals courts have already upheld it once, and Trump's team is continuing to fight it. Based on how the first case played out, appeals like this can drag on for years, especially when there is this much money and this much reputation on the line for everyone involved. So do not expect a quick resolution. Expect more filings, more court dates, and probably more headlines like the ones we just walked through today. And here's something worth sitting with for a second. Every time one of these cases wraps up, it does not erase the next one. It just clears space for the next fight to take center stage. So if you're keeping score at home, this is not game over. This is halftime. And the bigger game is still being played out in courtrooms right now with way more money on the table than what just got paid out. And one more thing worth pointing out before we wrap this up. None of this required a new trial, a new jury, or a single new piece of evidence. Everything that just happened was based entirely on decisions that were already made years ago. The 2023 jury already decided the facts. The appeals courts already reviewed those facts. The Supreme Court already had a chance to overturn it and chose not to. So really what we watched play out this month was not a new legal battle at all. It was the final mechanical step of a case that had already been decided, just finally reaching its natural conclusion after every possible delay ran out. So that's the full picture laid out simply. A $5 million verdict turned into a $5.8 million payment thanks to years of interest from stalling. A Supreme Court that refused to even look at the appeal, closing that chapter for good. Lawyers who fought until literally the final hour and still lost. And behind all of that, a second case worth over $83 million, still very much alive, still working its way through the courts with no ending in sight yet. This is not a small story, and it is definitely not a boring one. It's a real look at how legal consequences do not just disappear because time passes, or because someone holds a powerful title, or because a legal team throws every resource they've got at delaying the inevitable. Sometimes the bill just keeps growing while you wait. So keep an eye on that $83 million case, because when that one finally reaches its ending, this story we just walked through together is going to look like a small preview of something much, much bigger. And when it happens, you already know exactly where to come for the breakdown.